Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're calling from today. Welcome to this presentation from BDH Sterling. Hopefully, you can all now see on your screens. This is everything you need to know about UK pension transfers if you live in Australia, and of course, if you're soon thinking of moving to Australia. My name is John Vales. I'm one of the dual qualified chartered UK advisors for BDH Sterling. And I will attempt to be your host today and hopefully keep everything running as smoothly as possible. Now, there is some minor housekeeping before we do start. This presentation, as you can see on your screens there, it is for information purposes only. As you can probably imagine, tax legislation, it does and it can often change. The presentation here is not tailored to any individual investor, so please do not act on any of the information you hear today. Now, so you're well aware, the webinar slides, they will be available on our YouTube channel, including all of the past presentations that BDH have run over recent months. The format of today, 30-minute presentation with time for questions after that. You will now hopefully be seeing there's a Q&A text box on your screens. Any questions you think up whilst we're presenting this today, please do type in there and we'll get round to those at the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to take a few moments before we do properly start this. The webinar today has been sponsored by the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, the ABCC. Now, for those of you who are not aware of the Chamber, they are a network which connects like-minded companies together in the UK and in Australia. And BDH Sterling, we've been a member of the ABCC for probably the last 18 months now. And primarily for us, it's a platform which allows BDH Sterling to engage and to build relationships with other businesses who also have that Australian British interest. So joining us today, and I can see he's just come on with his video there, is a special guest, Mr. David McCready, OBE, who many of you already know, but for those of you who do not, David is a trusted advisor to the government and is currently leading the Chamber's work on the Australian-UK Free Trade Agreement. So David, welcome to the presentation and thank you for joining us today.
Look, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm in Sydney and unfortunately at the moment we're enduring one of those little COVID lockdowns that we've all endured from time to time across our various geographies in the last little while. But it's also what we call NAIDOC week here in Australia, and so I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet on Gadigal country here in Sydney. But look, it's terrific to be able to partner with BDH Sterling. The name gives it away, really. They're a sterling organisation to work with, really. It probably needs no more to say than that. But yeah, as was alluded to, our job is we're here to help. That's essentially our core business. And what we've developed over the last 111 years is a network of people through government, through private sector, through various government agencies, through the not-for-profit sector, in education, in all sorts of different institutions, over 30,000 people covering the whole geography of Australia, also into the UK, but also into other markets in Asia in particular. Great relationships with our brothers and sisters of the Hong Kong and Singapore and New Zealand and Malaysian and other British chambers in our part of the world as well. So we're here to help connect you between where you are now and where you'd like to get, and whether that means introducing you to business leads, people like what we're going to hear about today, who can help you with your personal finances and pension plans. You know, whatever the needs are, we're here to help try and connect you to those people. All our role is to help our members to achieve what they're trying to set out to do in their business, and around that, what they need to support their staff and their people to be successful to make that happen. So this is a great opportunity for us to support this endeavour this afternoon, or this afternoon Australian time. good morning to those in the UK. But it's an interesting and challenging space. It's probably been one of the most fraught areas. I've been doing my job for 11 years. The number of changes and things, and I know that a lot of that will get covered in the presentation today. It has been a minefield to keep across this space. So I'm really looking forward to getting my head around it through the presentation today. So thank you very much, John, and to the team at BDH Sterling for putting on the event this evening. We're very pleased to be able to support it, and we look forward to, well, I personally look forward to learning a lot in the next hour. So thanks very much. Back to you, John.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, David. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, as you can all see on your screens now, we've broken up the agenda today into 5 key sections. And talking us through these discussion points are going to be 2 of our very own financial planners from BDH Sterling. Now, section 1 will be dealt with by Phil Stoll. Phil's calling in from the Melbourne office today. He's a UK chartered financial planner and is very well positioned also to outline the key points of that UK transfer mechanism to Australia, including, of course, some of those pitfalls you want to watch out for. Following on from that, in sections 2 and 3, we have Rebecca Watson, who's one of our senior Australian financial planners. Now, Rebecca joins myself in the Perth office. She has a wealth of experience on the UK pension transfer process also. And then this afternoon, she'll be talking you through the part of that process, which deals with actually receiving the UK fund in Australia, which I'm sure you can imagine is a complex area in itself. Following on from that, I will wrap things up, and then section 5 you can see is the Q&A, where hopefully you all have a number of questions which you're keen to ask, and we can help with those. So moving on from there, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Phil Stoll.
Thank you, John, and hello to everyone attending this webinar. Hopefully you can hear and see me. Just to reintroduce myself, as John mentioned, my name's Phil. I'm a UK chartered financial planner and a pension transfer specialist, or PTS, based out of our Melbourne office of BDH. A PTS simply means that I have the necessary qualifications as well as experience to provide our clients with advice on all types of pensions. And today, what I'll look to do is go through the typical UK pensions that exist, that you might have, divide those into pensions that can and cannot be transferred and provide reasons why, as well as looking at the benefits of doing so and some of the areas to consider or pitfalls, again, of making that transfer to Australia. So I will start with talking about or running through the typical types of UK pensions that a lot of you here today will possess. So firstly, looking at those pensions that can be transferred, the first one being a company pension. Now, simply this describes a UK pension that was built up through your employment, whether that be continued employment or former employer, which you no longer work for, and covers both a defined benefit or final salary pension scheme, as well as a defined contribution or money purchase pension scheme. So both of those pensions fall underneath the broad heading of company pensions. The second is a private pension provision. Now, it might be that you took out a private pension with a life company or an insurer, for example, Aviva or Standard Life, Scottish Widows, those types of names that had no correlation to your employment fall under private pension provision. And lastly, of those pensions that can be transferred to Australia from the UK is a funded public sector defined benefit pension. Funded being the key word. That simply means that there's a pot of money that sits behind the pension scheme that supports all members and promises to pay your projected income from that scheme at retirement age. Looking to those pensions that now can't be transferred, the first being the UK state pension. So rules for the UK state pension changed in 2016, April 2016, and there was an introduction of a minimum and maximum cap or range of national insurance contributions. So the overview of that being that if you built up 10 years worth of national insurance contributions, you are eligible for a UK state pension, and the maximum being 35 years. The UK state pension now is due to pay from age 67, although for some people it might be earlier based on your birth date, date of birth. But what you can't do is transfer your entitlement to Australia. It must be paid directly from the UK to wherever and whichever bank account you wish it to be paid to. Secondly, government unfunded pensions. Again, the keyword here, unfunded. So with these types of pensions, there is no pot of money that supports your pension. The examples we've provided are NHS and Army. There are more, usually with the public sector or civil servants. These types of pensions are government unfunded. There is no pot of money and therefore can't be transferred away from the schemes. But of course, you can continue to hopefully enjoy the income that they promise to pay in the future, just not transfer. Thirdly, company pensions that are in the PPF. That stands for Pension Protection Fund. This really applies to defined benefit or final salary pensions, where the employer, the sponsoring employer, is in a scheme deficit, meaning that there's more liabilities than there is assets to support those liabilities. So the scheme is in a general deficit, and in severe cases, maybe the company itself goes into liquidation, administration, and in that scenario, the liability of the pension scheme moves to the Pension Protection Fund. So you are protected to a certain level, but if your pension is in the PPF, it can no longer be transferred away from the PPF. Similarly, company pensions that are already in payment. So if you have started an income stream from a pension, it is unlikely that that pension can then be transferred across to Australia. And again, quite similar here, annuities that are already purchased through a life insurance company. So if you've started an income stream, purchased an annuity, you are no longer allowed to transfer the residual balance that you haven't yet received as income over to Australia. Okay, so taking the company pensions, speaking about it in a bit more detail, we have two types: defined contribution pensions, which are also termed as money purchase pensions, MPPs. This describes a type of pension whereby the amount that you are to receive or the income that you can get out of that pension is purely dependent on the amount that you've put in, the amount you've contributed, as well as the growth of that fund value. So there's no guarantees attached to defined contribution pensions on the amount that you will receive, and it is dependent on those two factors. Alternatively, we have defined benefit pensions or final salary pension schemes, which promises to pay you a certain income level from a predetermined scheme retirement age. That income level is usually based on an element of your salary, whether it be your final salary at the date of retiring or career average earnings, it could be in some case, as well as the number of years you were in the scheme. So you were employed with that employer and an active member of that pension scheme. So based on those two factors determines the amount that you will receive at retirement. And quite commonly, that promise of a pension is quoted in a per annum amount. So what you don't find unless you specifically request it from the scheme is what that pot of money, what that value actually is. They quote it, the income that you will receive, but not necessarily the value, unless you request it from the scheme. And to do so, you're asking for a cash equivalent transfer value, a CETV. And just quickly on this, and I think quite importantly, if you're fortunate enough to have a defined benefit or final salary pension scheme, and having asked the scheme what that value is, what the cash equivalent transfer value is, if it comes back as more than £30,000, then legislation states that you must seek advice from a suitably qualified advisor to provide advice to you as to whether it's in your best interests to remove or transfer away from that scheme. I just wanted to point out that that's important and comes up later in the presentation. Okay, so now I want to touch on the potential reasons why you may consider transferring those pensions that are allowed to be, to Australia. And the key one, I think the most obvious one, is the element of currency control. Now, although the graph's slightly small on the presentation, what we show is the volatility of the sterling Aussie dollar exchange rate from 2014 up to 2019. And by keeping your UK pension in the UK and accessing it directly, would lead to you having to convert into Aussie dollars, assuming that's what you wanted to do, of course, and you can use the money at various exchange rates. And it does play a key factor in why a lot of our clients are looking to transfer their money. They would prefer to take the total value, the total pot value, and convert everything in one go at a favorable exchange rate, and thereby after then they know exactly how much they've got and can help them with their retirement planning. So that's what the first key reason for wanting to look at whether or not you can transfer your pension. Secondly, we have estate planning and the scheme funding deficit. So I'll run through these as well. The estate planning or succession planning is another key factor to consider. With defined benefit pensions, there is more often than not, so the majority of defined benefit pensions have an inbuilt spouse's pension to them. We've quoted that could be 50%, but it's quite common to see 1/3 or even 2/3 of your income entitlement is due to pass to the surviving spouse upon your death. However, upon the surviving spouse's death, there's often nothing left to pass to children or whoever it is you wanted to pass the money to. So to combat that, it is quite common for our clients to want to transfer away from a defined benefit scheme for more favourable succession or estate planning factors. The scheme funding deficit, I've touched on that before, but it's again more common than not for defined benefit pensions to be in a scheme deficit. They're such an expensive pension scheme to run by the employer that it's very, very common for schemes to be outweighed by the liabilities of the scheme and therefore have the potential of negatively falling into the hands of the PPF, the Pension Protection Fund. So in order to avoid that, a transfer of that pension must be done before entering the PPF. The final three reasons that we've listed as to why you may consider transferring your UK pension, the top one being investment control. Now, it may be that with a defined benefit pension, you don't have any control over where the money is invested. And again, usually with defined benefit pensions, the pot of money that sits behind them is invested quite conservatively. It might not be in line with your attitude to risk, your capacity for loss, your attitude to investment volatility. So the only way to go around that is to take investment control back from the pension scheme and make a transfer, meaning that you would be the one in control. So that might be a factor for you to consider. Then we have tax treatment benefits. Now, this is, again, very, very important. And as the point suggests, upon transferring a UK pension to Australia, the net amount transferred would be tax-free in terms of accessing via income and lump sum in retirement here in Australia. Okay, which is completely different to the way it would be taxed if it remained in the UK, which would be taxable. So by moving it to Australia, the net amount can be received tax-free in retirement. Now, I said the net amount because there is a tax to pay on the transfer, and that tax is calculated by taking the value as at the date you arrived in Australia and the value as at the eventual date of transfer. And the difference between those two values is considered growth, investment growth, and there is a tax on that growth amount. Okay. And lastly, a consolidation of your pension. So I think it's quite common these days to have had a career that's seen you work at a variety of employers and have built up several pension pots dotted around the place. If that is the case, it's quite hard to keep a grip on how your pensions are doing. So for pure admin efficiency, you may wish to consolidate your pensions into one in order to better prepare for your retirement. So that is another reason why pensions, you may consider transferring your pension. Okay, so I've gone through the reasons why it might be suitable. So I think it's only fair to now speak about those reasons why it might not be suitable. And the first one is it's not always cost effective. I guess this can be broken down into two things, but if you are to be advised on this, the advisor themselves may have a fee. BDH Sterling have a fee to provide our clients with advice. But also the tax that I mentioned before on the transfer to Australia may be quite significant. You may have been in Australia for many, many years, in which case there'd be a large proportion of your pension would be growth and therefore taxable. And crunching the numbers, it may simply be that taking those two into account means it's not in your best interests to actually do the transfer anyway. Secondly, your current UK pension might be performing well. You might have endured or experienced great performance over the years, or low costs to the pension, and these might be difficult to match. So we have an approved product list here at BDH Sterling of around 6-7 UK pension providers, and it may be that your current scheme simply is better positioned for your pension than the alternatives. The third point refers to an early exit charge or an exit penalty. Now, some UK pensions do have an exit penalty that would be incurred in the event of a transfer. Some don't, but some, those that do, it might be that's, again, fairly significant, which would, I guess, allow us to say, well, I think you should keep the scheme where it is and not incur that penalty, as you'd be better off. And lastly on this slide, and this is in reference to defined benefit pensions only really, is that you might not be comfortable in taking on the investment risk of your pension. For most of us, pensions are key, the key asset that we are to use in retirement for income. Where you have a defined benefit pension, the investment of that money is not for you, the liability is not with you, but by transferring away from the scheme, you would be taking on that responsibility. And for some, that might not be suitable. So what are your options? Well, if you are under age 55, well, taking a step back, the age of 55 is really important in the pension world, in the UK pension world in particular, because if you are under age 55, you are not permitted to transfer your UK pension to Australia. If you are over 55, that option is available to you. So what to do if you are under age 55? Well, for our clients, and where suitable, it might be that we still advise on the consolidating of your various pension pots, or the transfer of your current defined benefit pension into a defined contribution pension, first and foremost. And we can advise on the investment of that fund value up until the age of 55, where an onward transfer is then allowed. Or it may be that, having done our research and analysis, we advise that it makes sense for you to keep your pensions where they are, and we look at it again after turning 55 years old, and at which time a pension transfer could happen. So two options there for you. What is a SIP? So a SIP is a UK pension. It stands for a self-invested personal pension. It's quite similar to an SMSF here in Australia, a self-managed super fund, in that it allows you to really take control of the money. You could take control of the underlying investments, so how it's invested, which asset classes, the risk, the overall risk profile of the pension. In addition, it also allows for a currency conversion. So it's our default position is to use an interim product, interim pension in the UK if you're under age 55, that allows you a lot of things that you wouldn't have been able to do by keeping in your existing scheme. And I mentioned this just then, but just go over the benefits of using a SIP. So with the SIPs that we advise our clients to use, you can have the pension value in both sterling or Australian dollars. So going back to what I was talking about previously, which is one of the key reasons people want to transfer their pensions to Australia, is to lock in that currency. And it's BDH's default position that if the currency rate is favourable, then do lock it in to eliminate future currency risk. But within a SIP, you can hold both sterling and Australian dollars. In addition, you can invest money in both sterling and Australian dollars. So that's a key benefit of a SIP. The third point refers to the beneficiaries of a SIP. So with some of your pension schemes, defined benefit in particular, there, as I said, there's a built-in spouse's pension, but with a SIP, all the unused money can be passed to your beneficiary of choice in the event of your death. So it's more favourable for estate planning purposes than what you may have at the moment. And lastly, you can have as much input into the investment side of your pension as you wish. So a SIP allows you, it gives you the freedom, I guess, to choose. But a lot of our clients don't necessarily want to have that responsibility and are happy for BDH to invest their money on their behalf, and that is permissible with a UK SIP. Okay, so now looking to being over 55, what are your options? Well, I said it was a key age in UK pension world. The reason being that a transfer abroad, and in this case to Australia, can be done. What must be set up here in Australia is a receiving scheme that qualifies or is eligible for QROP status, Qualified Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme. It's a phrase that I think is quite common and that you may have heard of if you have a UK pension. And not to steal Rebecca's thunder, but she'll be going into a lot more detail as to the QROP's rules. But for now, it's important to note that you must have a QROP set up here in Australia to receive the money. And once you do, the transfer of your UK pension must fall within the non-concessional contribution limits, which starting this tax year are $110,000 per annum. Or alternatively, you can leave your pension in the UK. There is no rush, so to speak. It may be advisable to keep the pension in the UK for some people, but over 55, at least you have the option. Leave it in the UK or transfer it to a QROPS. Okay, and on that, I will pass directly to my colleague Rebecca, who will talk all things QROPS. Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks very much, Phil. As John mentioned before, my name's Rebecca Watson. I'm an Australian financial advisor and I work alongside John in our Perth office. So Phil's explained quite a bit about different types of UK pensions, what can and can't be done, and also the options for you depending on your age. What I'm going to talk a little bit about today is around that QROPS and the qualification that is needed on your Australian super if you are looking at wanting to transfer your funds over to Australia. So we gave a little bit of a hint in the previous slide, but QROPS stands for Qualifying Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme. It was introduced back in 2006, and it's at a UK pension, it's an Australian pension scheme that meets certain criteria set out by HMRC. It's also registered on their website and it meets certain rules that will allow the onward transfer of your UK funds to Australia. Now, it is really important that if you do look at transferring your UK pension to Australia, it is a qualifying fund. A lot of people may ask me the question, I've got a CBUS account, can I put my UK money into there? The answer is no, it's not a QROPS fund, it's a non-QROPS fund, and if that was to be done, you are breaching some rules and regulations, and it's basically classed as an unauthorised member payment, and there can be hefty taxes of up to 55% of the value you transfer over. So it's not something that you want to do. You want to make sure that if you are transferring to Australia, it's put into a qualifying fund. QROPS is an option for people who've left the UK permanently and intend to retire in Australia. It's not ideal for temporary residents or if you're looking to go back to the UK, but if you are looking to stay in Australia, QROPS fund would definitely be an option for you if you're looking at transferring your funds over. So as you can appreciate, there is a number of different legislation changes both in the UK and Australia. These things change daily. I'm going to go through a couple of the changes and a couple of situations you need to be aware of. And these are the considerations that BDH Sterling take into account when we're giving you our recommendation. So in 2015, which was the year I joined BDH Sterling, there were a number of changes to the pension environment in the UK. So I'm going to go through a couple of those. Phil alluded earlier in the presentation around unfunded government schemes. So you can't transfer out of those, and that was since April 2015. HMRC have also brought into legislation then the pension age test. So as you may be aware, you can't access your UK pension until you are 55 years old. In Australia, we used to have quite a number of QROPS funds, so your GESB funds, CBUS, pretty much most superannuation funds that you may have heard of at the moment were all on the QROPS register. But unfortunately, they were all removed in April 15, and we had 1,652 QROPS schemes removed from the list. And that was solely because they didn't meet the age test. So in Australia, you may be aware that you can access your super early, so before the age of 55, and that's through hardship if you meet certain criteria, or ill health. So HMRC saw that we were not meeting their requirements, and hence the funds were stripped. As of today's date, though, I am pleased to say that there are 2 vehicles or products that you can still get a QROPS qualification on. Those 2 products, there is a retail superannuation fund. It's with Australian Expat Super Fund, and they've been around for a couple of years, and they restrict membership to people over 55, and you can use that as your QROPS vehicle. The other product or vehicle is a self-managed super fund, which you can get QROPS qualification on. And again, that limits membership to over 55, and there's a few other rules and regulations you have to meet. If you need any help deciding which ones, some suit others more than others, so it just depends on your situation as to which product would be best for you. Another change that came out in 2015 is the FCA mentioned you have to get a licensed advisor, which is qualified for pension transfers. And this was mentioned by Phil earlier, that it has to be anything over 30,000 for a defined benefit. You have to seek independent financial advice. And that was obviously to protect you as a client, to making sure you are transferring out of schemes and understanding the benefits you are giving up. March 2017, there was more changes that came in the UK. So there was a 25% tax charge introduced to QROPS scheme transfers where the member does not reside in the same country as the QROPS scheme. So what that means is you have to be residing in the country you set up the QROPS fund in. So you have to be an Australian resident, you have to set up the fund, the QROPS fund in Australia, and when the money lands, you must reside in Australia. There is also a relevant period where you have to maintain your residency in Australia for 5 UK tax years from date of transfer. So that is, again, something that we consider with holistic advice, making sure that that is something that can be met moving forward when the transfer does occur in Australia. A couple of other changes that happened in 2017, and these are more Australian legislation. We mentioned earlier, Phil talked about non-concessional contributions. So the majority or a portion of your money, depending on the growth, when it comes to an Australian QROPS fund, is treated as a non-concessional contribution. Now, in 2017, the non-concessional contributions changed from $180,000 a year, or $540,000 using a bring it forward rule, down to $100,000 a year, or $300,000 bring forward. So that was the major change on the non-concessionals in 17. Now, as we sit here today, as of the 1st of July, some of you may be aware, that has changed again. So it has now gone to $110,000 a year, or $330,000 with the bring it forward. So you can see in that period of time there has been multiple changes just to the non-concessional caps. In Australia, there's been some other changes, and there will be more changes to the work test. So in order to be able to put money into super, you do have to meet a work test, and there are some more changes that are coming across. That's also not on the slide. The last change that isn't on the slide that I wanted just to bring up to your attention is there is a proposed change in the UK to the pension age test. So it is proposed in the UK that as of 2028, the UK will be raising the pension age from 55 to 57. So that obviously will affect some of you depending on your age and depending on when you are looking at bringing or moving your money outside of the scheme. So that is something we need to consider with holistic advice and making sure that we're across all the legislation. But the legislation changes, BDX Sterling can help you navigate through those, both UK and Australia. So the next slide talks about the benefits of the QROP. So I've gone through a few of these in the presentation already. So your pension will be in the same country as yourself. So we're assuming that you retire and will live out your retirement in Australia. So it's about consolidating, bringing your money into the country you're in and you plan to live on. Phil mentioned before about sterling or Australian dollar investment. The same things apply in the QROPS fund in Australia. You can have sterling or Aussie dollar, so it helps eliminate currency risk. When your money is in a QROPS fund in Australia, 100% of your pension passes to your dependents if you pass away. So unlike the defined benefits and estate planning in the UK, 100% of your benefits can be passed on to your dependents if it was in a QROPS fund. So that is definitely a benefit. The tax treatment of the benefits, again, it goes sort of hand in hand with what Phil was talking about. But once you meet preservation age in Australia, you can commence an account-based pension from your QROPS fund, and the money that you take out is tax-free, non-assessable, and there is no limit to how much you can take out. As long as you have the funds to manage your retirement long-term, you can take out whatever is required for your retirement. The other point on the last point on that slide is around UK and pensions can be consolidated into one fund. So that is true if you are looking at retaining, well, you have to retain your QROPS fund for a certain period of time. So you can look at transferring existing Australian superannuation funds that you may have built up into your QROPS fund. Doesn't suit everyone, and we do recommend you get advice on that, but sometimes there are benefits in consolidating the two pots together. It's around costing, investment choice, estate planning, that sort of thing. But I do recommend you get advice if that is something that you are looking at doing. Okay, so there's another thing you need to be mindful of when you do look at setting up a QROPS fund. There are certain responsibilities you need to make sure you adhere to. So the responsibilities is with the member or the scheme manager or scheme administrator. So these responsibilities go for 10 years from date of transfer. So from 10 years from the money landing in your QROPS fund, there are certain reporting requirements that you must go back to HMRC and tell them things. There's certain trigger events, which we can give you more details on, but it's things like starting an account-based pension, paying out to beneficiaries. You also need to report back to HMRC and let them know that your fund is still a qualifying fund. So certain things and events like that. You also need to make sure that any investments or benefits that you receive from the UK are invested correctly. So for example, lots of people ask if they can use their UK pension, bring it over to Australia and buy an investment property with that money. The UK legislation does not allow taxable property to be inside your pension. So you could not use your QROPS benefits to purchase a residential property. That would be a breach and there would be penalties in regards to that. There's a couple of other things you can't invest your money in when it comes into the QROPS fund, things like collectible cars, artwork, things like that. But they're really the only restrictions with your investments. Everything else is quite achievable. The other thing you need to comply with is member payment provision period. So this is how long you have to essentially keep your QROPS wrapper around your superannuation. And this is a bit of a tricky one, and we can talk to you about it because it is got a couple of dates in there, but it's essentially 10 years since your non-UK residency or 5 years after the transfer has been received, whichever is the longer. So after that period, you can roll to a non-QROPS, but before that, it needs to retain in a QROPS fund. But that is something BDH Sterling can assist you with. Okay, so the next slide, we're just going to go to the next slide now. So I'm just going to talk you through the transfer process and what BDH Sterling can assist you with the transfers process. So what we would recommend is you just reach out via email through the Q&A, can ask any questions, but basically we will find a little bit about yourself. So there's no obligation, there's no cost for the initial meeting. It's a really good opportunity for us to get to know you and what your goals and objectives are. And then we can discuss how BDH Sterling can be of assistance to you. You do get to review your options with an advisor. So you'd speak to someone like myself, Phil or John, where we talk you through your current situation. We would explain our engagement process and explain the costings associated with that as well. If you did engage in getting a pension transfer analysis report, so that will be a report which will outline exactly where your UK pension benefits are held, what the benefits are within that, if there's death benefits, final salary schemes, lots of different things. So you get a really good picture of where your current UK pot is sitting at the moment. We would have all the legislation in there, a lot more detail than I've gone into today around all the rules and regulations. It will also give you a transfer to Australia strategy if that is what we recommend. If we don't recommend you come out of your UK scheme, the report will explain the whys, and it'll be very clear in regards to our recommendations and the reason we have recommended what we have for your situation. We provide you with the report. We have another meeting where we talk about the recommendations. You can ask as many questions as you like. So it really gives you a really good snapshot of what we're recommending, so you can be very confident in your decision moving forward. If a transfer out of your scheme is recommended and you do engage with BDH Sterling, we'll manage the transfer process for you, help you with all the paperwork, whether that's into a SIP and then the onward transfer to Australia. So it just really just depends. So this is just the last slide here, is just around some of the things why you should seek advice. So a couple of the reasons is around legislation. So you're looking at UK and Australia. So BDH Sterling are specialists in this area, so we can take out any of the grey. And once we know your situation, we can recommend the best strategy for you. The big one is if you don't do it the right way first time, there are big penalties. There's up to 55% tax on your pension transfer. That's charged by the UK if you do not put it into a complying fund. But the most important thing, I think, is why you should seek advice is it just confirms if the pension is transferable for you. So if it's in your best interest to do so, it'll put you in the best position. So you're going in with your eyes wide open, very knowledgeable, and you essentially would become an expert on pensions and what the do's and the don'ts after the report's been presented. So I hope that's explained a little bit about the process and why we think you should seek advice. I'm going to hand over to John now, who's going to have a little bit of a chat about BDH Sterling.
Great, thanks Beck, and thanks Phil to you also. I hope everyone's found that really informative. I know there's a lot of detail there. There is even more detail we can go in if you want to have a initial meeting with us, but hopefully that's enough to give you a good understanding of how that transfer mechanism does work. Now, just to sum up, what I wanted to do now is really just talk about why BDH Sterling. And there's a number of points you can see on your screens there as to why you might consider using us and having further discussions with BDH Sterling. So first and foremost is something we are very proud about. We are dual licensed financial advisors, which means that we're qualified both in the UK, but also in Australia. So we can provide our clients that beginning to end service, which means that we can not have to outsource any particular tasks If you start to engage with BDH sterling, you know that you are dealing with BDH sterling from the beginning to the end. The second point there is something that Phil and Rebecca have both mentioned, the defined benefit scheme specialists, the PTS, the pension transfer specialists. We have a number of chartered advisors through the firm. We are the only UK Australian financial planning company who are UK chartered, meaning that we've been accredited with providing that highest caliber, the highest standard of financial advice, which I hope is something that you would be keen to have in your own financial planning. It gives our clients a lot of confidence that they know that they're dealing with an advisor who has their best interests in heart. Following that, we can also provide that Australian financial holistic advice too. So whether it's dealing with Australian super, insurance advice, or more general retirement planning, that is something that BDH Sterling can help with to give you that fuller picture of how retirement might look like. And of course, we have BDH tax. And so if you have an issue with regards to cross-border taxation, maybe you still hold a property in the UK and you're looking to dispose of that, or you're wanting to know how the income will be taxed, we can refer you to one of our accountants to talk you through that side of the financial planning process too. And the final point is simply we have a wealth of experience in this sector. So 15 years experience with UK pension transfers. I assure you there will be no case that we haven't seen in the past. So if you do have any complicated questions or a particular circumstance which you're really not sure which way to go with, please do get in touch and I'm sure we can help you with that. Now, within the invite you all would have received, there will be a website, inquiries@bdhsterling.com. If you would like to take the next step and engage with BDH Sterling for that initial conversation, please do send us an email. Alternatively, in the chat function here today, please put a note and we'll contact you over the coming days to get in touch and start talking about what your requirements are and maybe how BDH Sterling can help. Now, as we've been going through that presentation, as I thought that would be, there's been a number of questions coming through. So Phil and Rebecca, if I can ask you to both come back into the presentation, please. Great. Now, there's been a number of questions, like I say, some of them are quite personalized to individual circumstances. So for those questions, if we don't answer them in this particular segment, please don't worry, we will come back to you directly. But for others, I've got a good number of questions which are more generalized, which I think will be useful for everybody listening to this webinar. So Phil, if I can ask you the first question that I can see on my screen right now. So the question is, if I transfer my UK pension, where is it held?
Okay, thanks, John. Well, unfortunately, the answer depends on your age. So if you are under the age of 55 and we go ahead with a transfer of UK pensions, it will be transferred to an interim UK pension provider. And I mentioned we have an approved product list of a number of UK pensions which understand, the key thing being they understand the Australian rules, which is why they're on our approved product list. So if you're under age of 55 and a transfer of your pension happens, it will be held within the UK in a new interim pension product. If you're over the age of 55, it could be transferred almost immediately. So the answer to the question really depends on your age, over or under age 55. But if you're over, just on that last point, if you're over, it might be that an interim pension product is used initially just to get all the money consolidated into the one pot before the transfer. But from age 55, a transfer to Australia can happen.
Great, thanks. Another question that's come in, which I'll answer. The question here says, I live in the UK. I am over 55 already, and I'm an Australian citizen. Now, I plan to move back to Australia in 3 to 4 years. Can I start moving the QROPs now, or do I have to wait until I return to Australia? So if you remember the segment where Rebecca was talking about the overseas transfer charges, which is if you set up a QROP scheme, which is the receiving scheme for UK pension transfer, you also need to be a member of that country. So if you were to try and transfer the UK funds today, you're not a resident of Australia yet, which means you'll pay the overseas transfer charge to the UK, which would incur 25% penalty. So something that we would definitely advise you to avoid. You can start setting up the process now. So like Phil and like Rebecca have talked about today, we can start to review the pension whilst it's in the UK. We can prepare the strategy in advance. So when you do eventually get on that plane and then you land in Australia, everything's ready to go and we can get the process moving as quick as possible. Beck, I'll ask you this question, and it's just simply asking just to confirm that the QROPS is only relevant if you are over age 55.
That's correct, yeah. It has to restrict membership to people over 55 years old. That's correct.
Right. And Beck, I'll ask you this next one as well. The question says that what happens if the fund is a QROPS when you first transfer in, but then changes status later?
Okay, so that happened quite a bit back in 2015. The funds were, for example, with lots of clients that went to a BT superannuation fund, which at the time was QROPS, and then obviously overnight it was wiped. So as long as it was QROPS when the funds landed, you haven't breached anything and there's no penalties, but you still are on the 10-year reporting. So the fund has a responsibility for 10 years since date of transfer to report certain events back to HMRC.
Yeah, great. Phil, I'll pass this next question to you, if that's okay. I will shorten it slightly, but it says, I'm age 55 now, but working still in the UK. Sorry, I'm 55 now, but still working in the UK, but have moved to Australia in January 2020. I'm still paying into a UK pension. So if I contribute for another 5 years and then move it, does that mean the tax on the growth will be based on the difference in value of my pension when I move to Australia and when I move it to Australia? So yeah.
Okay, I think I got it. It's
yeah.
In that scenario, there would be a split residency treatment. So we would take into account the date that you first moved to Australia, the date that you left and returned to the UK, and then subsequently in 5 or so years' time when you come back. For the period that you are out of Australia, it's almost discounted away from the growth. So growth only is apparent for those that have been in Australia, or whilst you are in Australia. So for those years that you are not, well, to simply put it, it's discounted away from the growth. Also, I think you mentioned, the person mentioned contributions, John?
Yes.
Yeah, and for the contributions amount, that's also taken away from the growth. So contributions and periods of non-Australian residency will be taken away from the growth in order to assess the potential tax.
Yeah, great. Okay, the next question I can see is saying, or is asking, is there any justification for the increases in the annual transfer caps? So this is talking about the non-concessional contributions moving from $100,000 per year up to $110,000. They're asking whether it's to do with living or inflation costs. And as a result, can it be implied or hoped that further increases will incur? Well, yes, you are exactly right. The increases were actually on the concessional contribution caps, which is something you may remember was $25,000 last year. That increased to $27,500 because of the average earnings in Australia. Now, the way that the non-concessional is linked to the concessional is it's simply 4 times what the concessional is. So I believe we're now locked in for a number of years. I think the government have said that up until 2027 or 28, if I remember correctly, we are locked in at the current rates. But after that, we can expect inflation to typically increase those allowances over time. Beck, if I can ask you this question, simply it's what are the advantages or the disadvantages of an Australian Aesf versus an Australian SMSF?
So there's lots of there's different sort of scenarios on why I'd use both. Some it might be around costing. You might want to consolidate with a partner's superannuation. You might already have a self-managed super fund that you've already established and we need to QROPS. It's really around costing, also choice of investments, what you want to invest your funds in. things like that. They both have that CureOps wrapper, so it's just around what product suits your needs and what you want to do, fund value, that sort of thing as well. I think I covered all the benefits. Anyone?
Phil, I'll pass you this question. This is asking, with regards to the CureOps wrapper, is the 5-year period related to the individual transfers, or is it related to the whole process?
Yeah, it's the first, so individual transfers.
Yeah, great. Beck, this one, does a SAS in the UK work the same as a SIP, is the question.
I might get Phil to answer that one. Phil, do you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They are completely different. Of course they have similarities, like a lot of the different types of UK pensions, but a SAS traditionally was established through a company, a small medium enterprise that maybe had a few shareholders or a few key members of staff, and for those reasons they set up a SAS, which is an individual product within a company structure, rather than a SIP, which is a purely individual pension. So do they work in the same way? Although they're slightly different in the UK, both can be looked at in terms of an eventual transfer to Australia.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil.
And the question here, I'll pass this one to Beck again. So is there a maximum age for transferring into a CureOps?
Maximum age, right now they're 75, 74, the day you turn 75, yeah. But your limits will change as well. So there's some legislation changes that are coming into play as well. So you can't always use the bring it forward. Depends if you're working as well, things like that at this particular point. But watch this space because there are some more changes on the Australian legislation.
Yeah, so currently you have to meet the works test. That's right, isn't it? So you can't make those NCC, the non-concessional contributions, if you aren't meeting that works test. So that's what Beck's referring to as is going to change, hopefully, in the coming years. I'll answer this question, which is asking, when can the 10 years of CureOps reporting be reduced? And after you are out of the reporting timescales, can your SMSF continue as is, but without the CureOps restrictions? So yes, so firstly, there's two things to kind of key takeaways here, if you like. One is the UK relevant period, which is a 10-year timescale. Now, this is always fixed onto when you became non-UK tax resident. So you leave the UK and your 10-year clock effectively starts from that time then. So for some people, they don't start this process of moving their assets to Australia until that 10 years already passed, which means they've already got a big tick in that box, okay? So then we're looking at really the next period, which is the relevant period. And this is the 5-year period, which Rebecca talked about also. That is depending on when every transfer lands into Australia into a CureOps, your 5-year clock starts from that most recent transfer. So with regard to the question here, the 10-year first reporting period will kind of fall away. So the 10-year non-relevant period will fall away, but the 5-year period, which you have to still report back to HMRC after each transfer, will remain. So that will always be there if you keep transferring different tranches of your money across. Phil, the question is, for clarity, what do you do that some advisors based in Dubai or Malta do not?
Okay, thanks, John. Firstly, I think it's important to try to understand why these advisors are based in those countries, Dubai being quite a popular one. These countries do not have a lot of legislation in place, not a lot of regulation as well. So what we do is, as I think John mentioned right at the outset, is BDH Sterling have financial planning licenses in both Australia and the UK. So you should take comfort knowing that we understand both sides in terms of legislation, whereas, and not only that, but also we have to adhere to the legislation, to the regulations in both countries, whereas advisors in other jurisdictions, be it Dubai, be it Philippines, whatever it might be, will not have to adhere to those same rules. So we have the licenses, we have to adhere to the rules, we have the experience and understanding of both sets of rules. I think I could probably go on this topic for a lot longer, John, but I won't. I'll leave it to the key difference being the licenses.
Yeah, great. Look, there are plenty more questions that are still coming through. A lot of these, like I mentioned a few moments ago, they are very personalized to individual circumstances. So what we will do is email back the residual questions we haven't yet been able to get around to. Apologies for that, but like I say, in the next 24, 48 hours, we will respond to every question on our list. And look, I hope everything was, well, I hope it was a useful webinar for everybody that's attended today. And thank you again for listening in. Anything else that you both would like to say and sum up with?
That you said it well, John. Thanks to everyone, and obviously David for sitting in on the majority of the presentation. I think he was hoping there'd be a question for him, but it just hasn't materialised, David.
No, thank you very much, guys, for that. I have to say I have taken copious notes and I'm really pleased to be in possession of that presentation as well, because I think I have to say it's one of the things that most often causes confusion. The changes that have continued to happen, certainly over the last decade that I've been involved in this space, have been really complicated for the average punter just to get their head around. And when you're thinking about moving your life and a whole bunch of other things are going on for you, knowing that you've got somebody who can provide good advice, understands the system, understands the pitfalls, avoids the things, you know, Rebecca mentioned 55% of your cash being taken away if you do the wrong thing. Hey, there are some pretty big pitfalls to avoid here. So it's been really useful for me. I've taken, as I say, loads of notes. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I've really enjoyed it and taken away a lot of great information. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, David. And thank you again for everyone that joined us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're calling from. And yes, we hope to hear from you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.